Hey, this is Dark of All Trades, and I'm here with Dirk of Arrogant Media, and here we're going to do a new series called Benefit of the Doubt. In this series, what we're going to do is take questions that people ask that may be controversial, where it may be difficult to answer, and we're going to respond to them as if they honestly want an answer, because honestly, some people really want to know these things, and some people think that these questions are very good, and we want to address them so that it removes any doubt from anybody. So, in this series, episode 1, this is 10 questions a pro-choice candidate is never asked by the media from thegospelcoalition.org. I'd like to thank them, even though they didn't collaborate with me at all. So, to begin, without getting too pedantic, throughout this, I will be saying woman to mean person with a uterus. The questions asked refer to women, so I'm addressing it as such. Also, I'll start by addressing the term abortion. That will be defined as the termination of a pregnancy, typically resulting in the termination of a fetus or zygote as well. I will continue by saying that bodily autonomy is paramount. That is, no one has any right to use your body without your consent. Also, your consent can be withdrawn at any time for any or no reason. Let's begin. Question 1. You say you support a woman's right to make her own reproductive choices in regards to abortion and contraception. Are there any restrictions you would approve of? Not really. Outside of any procedure that is dangerous to the woman or others outside of her body, these are medical issues, which should be rigorously scrutinized. Contraception should be thoroughly tested, and any medical procedures should be deemed safe for the woman by her doctor. Your thoughts?
On if any of them should be limited or restricted then?
Yes, restricted or regulated.
Not that I can think of. I can't think. I don't believe that people truly use abortion as a form of birth control, for instance. So I'm going to be counting that out. Anything that would maybe perhaps change a person's state of mind way too much would probably have to be looked into. But otherwise, no.
All right, excellent. All right, question 2. In 2010, The Economist featured a cover story on the war on girls and the growth of gendercide in the world. Abortion based solely on the sex of the baby. Does this phenomenon pose a problem for you, or do you believe in the absolute right of a woman to terminate a pregnancy because the unborn fetus is female? I have absolutely no issue with someone wanting to get an abortion for any reason. It is their body and their bodily autonomy. If they do not want a certain biological sex inside of them for any reason, then they have the right to defend their own bodies. Your thoughts?
I'm gonna expand on this with something that Marilyn Manson once said, in that if you have a son, you only have to worry about one dick. If you have a daughter, then you have to worry about all the dicks in the world. Now, while this may be sounding like a shitpost, this does bring in something that people don't quite think about, in that the different sexes are going to come with their different things that you will have to handle at some point in the future. For instance, if you have a daughter, you're going to eventually have to work with them and explain to them what's going on when they have their very first period. So, with that itself being something that I would not consider being an actual issue with having one or the other, or intersex, I do still believe that it is a woman's right to be able to choose whether or not she wishes to carry the child. I would, however, be interested in seeing more of an explanation from this person as to why they would choose not to carry the child because of the sex that they are being assigned.
Yeah, it's interesting that we apply this label of sex or gender, and I feel that that is irrelevant to the point of the idea is that a woman can control her body however she decides. And so if there is an issue with the unborn child, whatever you want to call it, that they have the right to terminate it for any reason at any time. And the reason is not, well, it's interesting to know the reason is not required.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, there is there was that mandate in China where you could only have so many children. It was you were only able to have one child. And then what people would do is if they found out that their child was going to be a girl, for instance, they would terminate the pregnancy.
Mhm.
So like that is something that came that was a side effect of having that mandate from China.
Mhm. And we can talk about the morality of why people do it in terms of, is it okay? And that's a completely different discussion in terms of should it be legal. I think that it doesn't matter. Like the sex gender of the unborn child is irrelevant to whether or not an abortion should be legalized or allowed. All right. Question 3. In many states, a teenager can have an abortion without her parents' consent or knowledge, but cannot get an aspirin from the school nurse without parental authorization. Do you support any restrictions or parental notification regarding abortion access for minors? According to hhs.gov, there's something called the privacy rule. This generally allows a parent to have access to the medical records about his or her child and as his or her minor child's personal representative when such access is not inconsistent with state or other law. There are 3 situations when a parent would not be the minor's personal representative under the privacy rule. The first one is applicable here, and that is, quote, when the minor is the one who consents to the care and the consent of the parent is not required under the state or other applicable law. I do not believe a parent has the right to control their teenager's body specifically, outside of keeping them generally healthy, which could include things like vaccines and some dietary issues, as well as some other medical issues which are important for the child's health. Parents have the right under the law to view their teenager's medical records, but not specific notes made by the medical professionals, such as psychiatrists. It is up to the parents to check the medical records, not the child or medical professionals, to bring up the procedure that has been done to the teenager. Your thoughts?
That's actually a bit of a difficult one. Yeah, I this gets into individuality and who claims the rights of being able to tell what we could do with the kid's body. I do think that it has to be up to the child, though. And this is a tough one. This is a tough one. I think that the parents should be involved to a certain extent, not to be able to tell them like this is what you're supposed to do, but let the doctors be able to determine what is going to be best for the child and then go from there.
Mm-hmm. As long as it is not dangerous to the child's health, I don't think the parents should have any say on what the child does with their body. Again, assuming it is medically safe, and you could go so far as to say medically necessary, as long as it entails the child's bodily autonomy.
So, can I expand on that real quick?
Go ahead.
The idea of a child wishing to transition while they're in their development. So while they're a preteen or an early teenager, do you think that adds a nuance?
No, I don't think that adds a nuance. I think that it's a complicated issue that people should investigate. I'm not aware of enough studies to make a formal assessment on whether it's good or bad or safe. I know that things like puberty blockers and hormone blockers are important in this kind of stage when the child is developing their hormones, but they're not sure of whether they should transition or not, or they think they should, but the parents aren't sure. Like, these things it's a tough nuance that should be examined, that I don't think enough data is in right now. But again, I haven't seen all the data, but
right.
It should maintain as the individual's determination of what they want to do to their body.
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. Question 4. If you do not believe that human life begins at conception, when do you believe it begins? At what stage of development should an unborn child have human rights? All right, this really isn't as big of a problem as people seem to think it is. I'm okay with life, quote, beginning at conception. This doesn't change anything about the discussion. I am 100% okay with giving an unborn child human rights at any point. However, to attempt to say that the unborn's rights supersede the living person's right is something I am against. Your thoughts?
Okay. I listened to a podcast episode by Devin Townsend, who described having a child to me in a way that made a lot of sense. What he said was that the way that he described a baby was a need blob. So what this means is that it was something that would just cry, eat, shit, and sleep. So it didn't have any kind of real personality that was developed within itself yet. This is something that takes a lot of time. It's gonna take months before you even see something of a personality within that need blob. And so with it, I don't really think of it's hard for me to think of a fetus as an actual person. And so with life being at conception, I mean, sure, but at that point though, like it's just a blob. It's something that is still going to be developing physically and mentally way after it's born.
I'm inclined to agree. The idea here is that I accept that a human life is at conception, and I think the person asking the question thinks that because it has human rights, that means it should get special rights, some sort of protections that born children have, that we think that, for example, that their life is important, therefore killing or aborting a fetus is just like killing a baby, when they're completely different things at this point.
Yeah. And that's something that became a little bit more nuanced for me after I heard of babies being described that way.
And I think it's an appeal to emotion. It's trying to evoke an emotional response to something that doesn't need an emotional response. It's a way of manipulating the person.
Completely. Yeah.
All right. Question 5. Currently, when genetic testing reveals an unborn child has Down syndrome, most women choose to abort. How do you answer the charge that this phenomenon resembles the eugenics movement a century ago, the slow but deliberate weeding out of those our society would deem unfit to live? If the issue is that, quote, it resembles eugenics, then I don't care what it, quote, looks like. I care about what is actually happening. I care about the facts of the situation. Forcing someone to keep a child they do not want has been shown to be harmful to everyone involved. Global Doctors for Choice has a good list of what many studies have found with sources for these findings, and I'll post those below.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the use of the term eugenics is an appeal to emotions. And I think that there are people that are not willing to put themselves in the shoes of others that have had to go through raising a child that has Down syndrome, for instance. When you look at Down syndrome as an example, a person who has Down syndrome has their life expectancy a lot lower than the average person. And so there's a lot more to consider about this. And so I really do believe that if a person does not want to raise a child with those, traits, they should not have to. If you figure out early in the pregnancy, doesn't matter at what point during that pregnancy, that the child has Down syndrome, and you decide that this is going to be something that is going to be too painful for you to go through, I cannot blame you for choosing not to have the child.
I think this touches right along with if you find out that it's male or female and you decide to abort based on that idea, is that okay? It's the exact same concept. It's just another category. Is like, if it's male, abort; if it's female, keep it; or if it has Down syndrome, abort; if it doesn't have Down syndrome, keep it. It's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It's a removal of the choice, and it's a removal of the bodily autonomy. All right. Question 6. Do you believe an employer should be forced to violate his or her religious conscience by providing access to Aborificent drugs and contraception to employers? Yes. I think it's part of doing business. If you own a business and are required to provide access to any kind of medical care, then you should be forced to provide what is required by law. Your personal religious beliefs are irrelevant in this case. Otherwise, you could use something like the Jehovah's Witnesses' beliefs to not have to provide medical care to someone who needs blood, specifically things like transfusions or any way where a body would require the blood of another person. You could take an extreme point of view and say that you don't want to give any medication because of your religious beliefs. We need to have a standard, and your religious beliefs cannot and should not affect me. Otherwise, what law should one be allowed to circumvent due to just religious reasons? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that religious hold and dogma has taken a grasp a little bit, like way too much for how people make their decisions, business-wise and in terms of how they help take care of other people. Now, granted, I don't go to an employer as someone that needs to take care of me. I go there as a business exchange. I give you my labor, and in exchange, I get whatever amount of money that you agree to, plus whatever benefits you decide to throw into the package for me. If you are providing me medical insurance, then that insurance should be dictating what I am and am not able to do with it.
I can see that. So the idea here goes to, should a person's religious beliefs affect somebody else?
Yeah, and that's basically what I was getting at, where I don't want my employer saying no when my insurance is like, yeah, we'll cover this for you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it really has nothing to do with the employer at all. It's them sticking their nose in someone else's business.
Absolutely, that's absolutely it.
All right, question 7. Alveda King, niece of Martin Luther King Jr., has said that, quote, abortion is the white supremacist's best friend, end quote. Pointing to the fact that Black and Latinos represent 25% of our population, but account for 59% of all abortions. How do you respond to the charge that majority of abortion clinics are found in inner city areas with large numbers of minorities? This question is mostly another appeal to emotion. It uses charged language to elicit an emotional response to the listeners. Where the clinics are located has nothing to do with anything relevant. Inner city areas with large numbers of minorities tend to have a more dense population, and thanks to socioeconomic issues, also tends to have more poverty. Clinics that provide information on safe sex and help prevent unwanted pregnancies, as well as provide abortion services to those who are in those situations, help reduce some of those social and economic issues that exist here. If someone can't afford to finish their pregnancy, have a child, and raise the child, then these clinics offer help for that person. The alternative would be that they either try to abort on their own, which we know is dangerous, or they try to go through with the pregnancy and incur the already astronomical costs of medical appointments throughout and then the birth.
To expand on that, I believe that this argument of being X amount of population contributes to Y amount of it's very much like the 1350 argument. You're familiar with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which was completely racist in the first place, and I do think that argument against abortion is touching in that space in a way that I'm not okay with.
I'm inclined to agree. The idea that some socioeconomic group is more likely to do something based on their socioeconomic situation is irrelevant to the idea that whether it should be legal for that thing to happen.
I like the way that Destiny puts it during his discussions, in that we're all victims of circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just because I am whatever race I am does not actually determine, whether or not I'm going to be choosing to have an abortion, it's based off of my own circumstances that I come from. Well, it's based off of a lot of where life deals me.
Mhm.
So, and a lot of these things I have no actual choice from.
Mhm. And you could also take it a step further and say correlation does not equal causation.
Huh. I say that a lot, but nobody listens to
Yeah,
me.
right? All right. Question 8. You describe abortion as, quote, a tragic choice, end quote. If abortion is not morally objectionable, then why is it tragic? Does this mean there is something about abortion that is different than other standard surgical procedures? All right. I don't like it, but it's not necessarily, that does not necessarily mean I'm convinced it's tragic. Quote, even if I were to say so, tragic and morally objectionable are not synonymous. Sudden death is tragic, but I would not say that it is morally objectionable. Abortion itself is different from other surgical procedures, regardless of the language used to describe the issue. We don't have to like abortions to understand that they are sometimes the better option. Just like we don't have to like the fact that we need to drive to work and put pollutants in the air, even though walking or riding a bike is a superior option for the environment.
I'm sorry. What's this thing called euthanasia to pet owners? What's this thing where it's like, your dog is sick to the point where it is not going to be living a fulfilling life if you keep it alive at this point, and the better option is to let it be euthanized by a professional veterinarian. Like, that is, like, I don't mean to compare babies to pets, but like, I'm using it to describe that. Yeah, it's something that we are doing out of like mercy. Like, if I'm understanding that I am not going to provide the best life for the child that I'm going to have, then, and on top of that, there are alternatives such as adoption. Well, adoption could also mean that my child could never see me again. Like, this is a legit thing. Even like, there are adoptions where the parent is supposed to be able to have contact with the child. That doesn't always work that way. And so the child could, as far as you know, grow up and resent you, and you could never have any good or real relationship with that child as it grows and it's in adulthood. So, like, it's when people have the abortion, they are trying to prevent themselves and the child from having what could actually be the worst case scenario.
Mm, yeah. Right. Question 9. Do you believe abortion should be legal once the unborn fetus is viable, that is able to survive outside the womb? An abortion should be legal at any time that a woman's body is being used and she no longer wants it to be used. As stated before, an abortion is the termination of the pregnancy. To be clear, there are procedures where if the fetus is viable outside the womb and not requiring the use of a body, then those procedures should be done first. We should use the minimal amount of force necessary to accomplish the goal. This could be done by such methods as, but not limited to, inducing birth or performing a cesarean section. Your thoughts?
It goes back into that need blob description. So we are not like the turtles, where as soon as they hatch, they have to make it to the ocean, and then from there they can actually grow and develop. As soon as these turtles hatch, they have the motor functions to be able to move and get themselves from point A to point B, and then they're able to feed themselves. And they're not being raised by their mother. It's a fight or flight kind of mechanism for them. Humans are not that way. As soon as a baby is born, it is automatically going to be needing things. It is going to need you to feed it. It will need you to clothe it, to keep it warm, to keep it safe. If you leave a baby by itself, just plop right there, it's not going to survive. It's not going to have any way of getting itself moved around or fighting food. You can't expect that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are completely dependent on us.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This is something I want to touch on a little later, that consenting to pregnancy and is consenting to birth uh, as long as you're consenting. And that when you consent to birth to complete your pregnancy, then you are consenting to make sure that child is taken care of. However that means, even if it means putting it up for adoption so that someone else can take care of it, it is still your responsibility once you give birth.
Yeah, completely.
All right. Finally, question 10. If a pregnant woman and her unborn child are murdered, do you believe the criminal should face 2 counts of murder and serve a harsher sentence? Probably. If we grant personhood to a fetus at conception, then maybe. But under the common law, that is, law originating from custom and court decisions rather than statutes, murder is the intentional killing that was either unlawful, in other words, not legally justified, and committed with, quote, malice aforethought. This means the goal must be to inflict harm or to do something reckless enough to cause that bodily injury. Can you murder someone that no one knows exists? Maybe. If the person knows about the fetus, then yes. If not, then it is largely dependent on variables that are typically up to the judge and jury to decide. Without knowledge, it should likely be 1 count of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. Source for the legal from the legal encyclopedia down below.
Okay. That was a hard question at first, but then as the more that I thought about it, when you murder somebody, you are stealing their right to be able to live in the way that they want to. I believe that nobody should take my own life except for myself, or unless I, through final exit, give permission to have my life taken. A self-euthanization. When you murder somebody that is pregnant, if that person was planning to carry that pregnancy, then you not only stole the person's life that is carrying the child, but you were also stealing from the people that were looking forward to raising that child as well. Now, granted though, if somebody aborts the child, if somebody decides to not carry the child, yes, that is taking that opportunity from people that wanted to help raise the child as well. But that should ultimately be the carrier's decision in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So those are the end of the questions. I wanted to get into a couple more topics on this. I want to clarify something that I said before. The idea that the least amount of force should be used in order to maintain someone's rights. So when an abortion is done, it is because the woman has decided that she's revoking consent to allow this thing to violate her bodily autonomy. As long as she consents, there's no violation. Once the violation happens, that's when something needs to be done. I can liken it to an analogy. Let's say, for example, I allow someone to punch me in the face, okay? And I allow them to keep doing it. And now, my bodily autonomy has not been violated because I am consenting.
Thank you sir, may I have another?
Exactly the case. So, as long as I'm consenting, everything's fine. The moment I withdraw consent, then and make it known, I would assert, then any other punches that have been done violate my bodily autonomy, in which case that needs to be stopped. In which case we would use the least amount of force in order to do it. We ask politely, hey, stop punching me. And if they don't stop, we move on to physical force. And if that doesn't work, we call the police and they come and try to physically restrain the person, maybe up to tasering. And if that doesn't work, maybe we have to shoot him.
Yeah, okay.
That's an extreme example, of course.
Extreme. It sounds goofy, but it's a thing.
It really is. Okay, and then we can take it a step further, because one of the general criticisms of that kind of thing is, well, the fetus did not decide to be there. It is not their choice. That is something I hear a lot, and people think it's a good argument. And I understand why, but there's a problem. It doesn't matter whether they are intentionally violating my bodily autonomy or not. If I give consent for someone to punch me in the face and they can't help but punch me in the face, then it's fine until I revoke my consent, and then we go to that. If they can't help but punch me in the face, then it's unfortunate, but we still have to stop them from violating my bodily autonomy. That's still the problem. So if they can't help but do it, then we go through those steps. Your thoughts?
God, like, how do you want me to touch on this then? Because I'm not sure where you want me to go with this here.
At what point does the use of physical force, when do we allow that?
Well, yeah, it really goes as far as until I say I'm not okay with this anymore. Like, as soon as I say I'm not okay with this anymore, then yeah, that has to stop dead on the tracks. It's why there's safety words.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Do you agree then that the least amount of force should be used, the least amount of force necessary to achieve the goal?
Now what? Okay. I'm gonna handle this from the Satanist point of view here, in that if somebody is bothering you, then you ask them to stop. If they do not stop, destroy them. So in other words, if somebody is violating me in some sort of way, then it is my responsibility to make them stop. And I make them stop as soon as I can, as fast as I can, and make it very clear that I'm trying to make them stop.
Right.
So I don't really think it's like a thing of like using the least amount of resistance needed. It's if I want to make a point and use that person to make a point, I will do so.
I'm not sure if I necessarily agree that it should go from ask politely to murder, but well, in this case, killing. I'm not sure I would do. I'm sure there was some steps in between.
I'm not saying like go to murder. It's actually I could expand on that a bit here. So I'm gonna get into an extreme here. If somebody is worth a bullet, then they are worth the entire cartridge. If your job is to make sure someone is down and stays down, then you have to do that. It's not always going to be the case. It doesn't mean that you should just shoot somebody as soon as they start like hurting you for any reason. It's even then, there's a lot of nuance to this, I think.
There is. It's been likened to, imagine someone is entering your house. So let's consider this. Consider you allow someone into your house and they've overstayed their welcome. What is your next step?
That is going to depend. So this is something where I might have to play around with different scenarios with it. If I've got someone that's just being an asshole and I ask them, you need to go, and they say, no, make me. Okay, well, then I will drag you. I will physically drag you out of my house if I need to. If somebody breaks into my house and I start and I feel that they are a threat to myself and whoever is living with me, then yeah, I think I have every right to be able to take my gun and be able to take care of the problem. I don't have to expand on where that goes. There's a lot of nuances to it. I think that not every person is going to require the bullet, but there are going to be some instances where you need to do that.
Okay. To touch very briefly on the morality issue of it, can we agree that morally it is morally superior to start with the least amount of force and escalate until the job is done?
That varies. There are some times where yes.
Okay. Can you give me an example of a time where the least amount of force necessary to accomplish the goal is not the right thing to do, and instead using excessive force or more force than is necessary is the right thing to do?
Well, that's the thing, though. If somebody breaks into my house, I don't know what sort of force is going to be necessary. And so I can't afford to test that out.
Mm-hmm. But then you're operating on an unknown at that point.
Yeah.
Can we agree then that if someone breaks into your house and you have enough information to know that they don't have a gun or they don't have enough, they don't have a weapon or something like that, shooting them in the leg and disabling them is better than killing them outright?
No, you should never shoot to harm. You never do that. that never that is always going to end in a horrible scenario. If you shoot somebody, you should only do it to destroy them. That's it.
I can understand why you'd say that.
Yeah, it's sort of why. It is exactly why you have people that are saying that, well, that cop shouldn't have like shot to kill. They should just shoot to wound. No, that's not a thing. It's like cops do not operate on that kind of manner. If they, and granted, there are plenty of cops that are unjustly using a gun when they absolutely should not do so. But if a gun ever has to be used, then this is exactly why I say if somebody is worth a bullet, they are worth the cartridge.
Yes, perhaps I worded that poorly. Perhaps, so when I say that the least amount of force necessary to accomplish the goal, if you know that there's an amount of force that is necessary to accomplish the goal, is going farther than that necessary?
Probably not. Probably not, yeah.
Okay, that's kind of what I was getting at. So the same idea goes with the abortion idea, is that when you consent to sex and a pregnancy resolves from that, then you have allowed something to enter your body, and it is in your body for as long as you allow it to be, for as long as you're consenting. Once you revoke your consent, they have overstayed their welcome, and at that point, you get them out of your house however you see necessary. However, I feel that the best method is to use the least amount of force until your goal is accomplished. So we know that not doing anything is the least amount of force, but it does not accomplish the goal for 9 months, and you're still getting your consent violated.
Right.
And so you stop the violation first. So typically abortion is the right way to go, is the only way to go in terms of ceasing the bodily autonomy violation. You have any thoughts on that?
I agree. There's not much I can really expand on with that one. I just agree with it.
Okay. So is there anything else on abortion that you want to touch on that you don't think I touched on enough?
I think that so much of the discussion on abortion is so religiously fueled. And I think it's going to be a long, long time until the majority of people can actually take that out of their mindset. And it's probably not going to happen until well after I am an old man and gone. That's just the nature of it. It's almost impossible to come to conclusions without your own kind of biases anyway. And with something as emotionally fueled as a child is, it's going to take a long time before we come to something more universal.
So this is where I can take the legal aspect of it and say we're discussing whether this should be legal in America. Now, America is a secular nation. We are not a religious nation. We were founded on the idea of separation of this church and state. And so any religious reason that one can apply to abortion is invalid because it's a religious reason. What you can do is take a secular reason, a reason outside of abortion, or excuse me, outside of religion, and apply it to the idea, and then we can evaluate it. But once we put a religious aspect on it, then we can throw that argument out. It's either it's a good argument because it's secular, or it's not a good argument because it's secular.
Well, and then who is to say that you're not going to eventually have that religion change on you at some point? So, I mean, if the Catholic Church is able to actually change their position on evolution and acknowledge that it's an actual thing, like the sky is the limit.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Is there anything else on this you wanted to discuss?
Not that I can think of, but I actually really enjoyed this discussion. It's good to be able to actually have something that's more of a brain exercise for myself.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. So the idea behind this series is that we're going to discuss ideas that are controversial that people are taught not to talk about, such as religion and politics specifically. I think that the idea that we're told not to discuss religion and politics with other people makes us dumber on those subjects as other countries would be. And I think that if we have a more open discussion, we can educate each other and come to a more well-rounded understanding of these kinds of topics. And the topics that we're going to talk about in this series are going to be those more emotionally charged or the more controversial topics so that we can open a dialogue. So at this point, I'd like to thank Dirk from Arrogant Media. Links to his stuff are down below. Please check him out and all of his bearded glory. So I am Dark of Dark of All Trades. Thank you for listening. Give me a like, give me a subscribe, and I will see you in episode 2 of Benefit of the Doubt. Thank you.